Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg, and our subject today, learning disabilities. What qualifies as learning disability? How common are they? How disruptive to people's lives? And are they treatable? And how do you treat them? With us today is Nira Scherz-Busch. She is a licensed school psychologist 43 years ago. She started work in special education just as the field emerged. She's been in private practice for 33 years and is director of a clinic, child and family psychological services in Madison, Wisconsin. She's been specializing in working with children with learning disabilities for these past 33 years. Also with us is her partner in crime, Dennis Christoffersen, who is a senior psychologist at the University of Wisconsin Counseling Center and has been working with her for quite a long time, 17 years in private practice, and he's had lots of experience working with people with learning disabilities. Thanks very much for both of you joining us.
Thank you.
Let's begin at the beginning. How do you know something is a learning disability? What is a learning disability?
Most learning disabilities these days we know are neurologically based and anchored in differences in how the brain processes information, how the brain is so-called wired to process information.
So you're kind of born with it in your brain?
Yeah. Usually many or most of them are have some genetic component. Learning disabilities can also occur, acquired learning disabilities as a result of brain injury or a traumatic event.
That's interesting because immediately what comes to my mind is compassion.
The two words that most kids with learning disabilities hear very often and hate to hear is try harder. Because no matter how hard they try, and most of them try very hard, they can't change their brain. And our philosophy at the clinic is that there's really no need to change the brain because we do not want to live in a world where all brains are similar.
Nice. How common are learning disabilities? What percentage of children are born or have an accident that leads to this defect?
There are no real statistics, numbers on how many people have it because there are numerous people or kids who are not diagnosed and mistakenly ended up being labeled behavior problems, mental health problems, whatever. The estimates run around about 20% of the population.
So I'm hearing between the lines you think it's even higher than that?
Most likely, yes.
Maybe 1 out of 3 kids.
The knowledge in specific areas of learning disabilities is that approximately 2 out of 10 individuals in the population have language-based learning disabilities such as dyslexia, expressive language disorders.
Let's first list the learning disabilities. So we're hearing reading and words, dyslexia, I hate to mispronounce the others.
Dysgraphia. The other type of disability or disabilities that you didn't mention are nonverbal learning disabilities, which in Europe are called dyspraxia, and in the United States it's called NLD, nonverbal learning disorders.
Can you give me a little fleshing that out? How does that work?
Yeah, I can because I have one.
Oh, you do?
Yes. They're kids or individuals who are very verbal, usually start reading early, talking early, have extreme difficulties with the understanding and being able to read nonverbal communications. Our communications consist of about 60-70% nonverbal communications. People who have that disability have a hard time literally reading it, understanding it, things that have to do with maintaining eye contact, appropriate eye contact, understanding the difference between verbal communications, intonation, level of voice. We call it prosody. In other words, understanding if the difference between if I said, "Wow, you look good today," or "Oh, you look good today."
Well, now, isn't that Asperger's?
It's on the same spectrum. Most of the time, those kids who have those or people who have those disabilities really don't look like they have disabilities in the early years of school because they read very easily and well, they talk very well, but later on have tremendous difficulties with social skills.
Could we do this? Little ping pong. Maybe bring Dennis in at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm talking.
Sure. Oh, no, you're not talking too much, but that's very interesting. But let's just do ping pong of naming learning disabilities. Just get the names out and then explore them further, just so people who might wonder, is this a learning disability, say yes or no. So we've got, just rattle them off, the names.
Sure. Well, as Nira talked about, right now in the DSM-4, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 4.
That you people use.
That we people use.
And you need that to bill people, too, I assume.
Yes, it's just a common, it's a way of everybody around the world having a common language.
Okay.
ICD-9 is another classification system, and that's all going revision with DSM-5.
Okay.
So that'll be very interesting to see how the classifications pan out. But right now, disorder of written expression, disorder.
What's the name for it?
And that's dysgraphia. That's what Nira was talking about. But the most common are disorders of reading, and dyslexia is what Nira had talked about.
So.
And the last that she was talking about, well, nonverbal learning disorders, and then also dyscalculia, which is the disorder of a mathematical disorder. How would you describe it, Nira? Concept or calculations?
Both. Usually people with nonverbal learning disorders, and that's one of the ways we distinguish between that and Asperger's. Asperger's people are usually do very well with math, actually. People with nonverbal learning disabilities have a huge difficulty understanding math concepts, understanding the sequential nature of math, the step-by-step that's involved in solving math problems.
And that's a brain that's something you're born with.
That, too, is
not cultural.
Not really. I have dyscalculia as part of my nonverbal learning disability, which was not diagnosed until way after I finished school. But it's really not understanding how math works or not having the ability to understand math concepts. And time involved in it is also anything else that's of a sequential nature, like time, sense, things like that.
How many learning disabilities are there?
About, so far identified, I think we just said all of them. Dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, nonverbal learning disorders.
Okay, and I don't hear ADHD in there. And I don't hear executive function in there.
ADHD has been up and down the learning disabilities continuum. It used to be, the thinking in the field used to be that ADHD are more of a chemical change in the body or something like that. We really don't know their origin. We do know that, like other learning disabilities, they often come in families. There's a higher incidence in families who have someone who has ADHD to have someone else with it. They're not considered learning disabilities mostly because most of the time they don't affect academic learning. They affect the ability to organize, to time manage, to turn your homework in on time, to understand, to be able to attend to a class lecture or a teacher talking and so on and so forth. But not necessarily. We see a number of adults with ADHD actually who academically test out fine. It also depends on their level of intelligence and schooling and so on and so forth. But they're doing
well. When you work with kids with ADHD, I assume, Dennis.
Sure.
Okay. And doesn't that affect their academic performance?
Oh, absolutely. There's also, but it's ADHD is kind of a catch-all sort of thing. So when in doubt, people will just often say ADHD.
Attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder.
Right. And so that could be either primarily inattentive type or hyperactive type or the combined type. Interestingly, in the clinic, we've seen a lot of children that actually have auditory processing disorders, and they look almost indistinguishable from ADHD,
Really?
but it's really a disorder of central auditory processing, which requires special evaluation.
Dennis, what do you mean by that? What's the problem with auditory processing?
Difficulty. You actually wanted to. Did you want to say something? Or?
Auditory processing disorders are difficulties in how the brain interprets what you hear. They're not hearing disorders.
And with an ADHD person who's not hearing, how is that different?
It's more distractibility, and they go off on tangents, and I can be listening, you can be the teacher, and I see there's a spider up there, and it's like, oh, that's very interesting, or I start going off on my own daydreams.
Okay. I'm feeling a little kind of distracted here about ADHD and learning disabilities. So if someone comes to your clinic and it looks to you like they have ADHD, do you say we can't treat you because that's not a learning disability?
No. We actually at the clinic we treat people who have both learning disabilities, mental health disorders, a combination of both.
Right.
ADHD has not been considered a learning disability, and actually was not part of the special education law until very recently. Unfortunately, after my daughter graduated from high school, it then became part of the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, because they added focusing to the major life functions.
But they're not calling that a learning disability?
But they're still not called learning disabilities. In other words, a student will not get into a learning disability category within what we call an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. Because of ADHD, they would not necessarily go into a class for people with learning disabilities. Most likely, they would fit into a class or a special education category that's called emotional behavioral disabilities.
Okay, well this is
Right.
interesting. I didn't. It's a very important distinction that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I assume most people didn't.
So maybe bigger picture, kids that aren't performing, that seem capable, and they're just not achieving. They're not reading on track with their peers, or they're not able. They're writing, something is off with that. But it looks like they have the capability, but they're just not performing. They start looking at, is there actually a learning disability? And they really, like Nira was saying, focus on, disorders of reading, writing, that sorts of things.
Now, what percentage, if you had a guess, I don't know if you know this data, but if you look at kids by 4th grade or something who are having trouble, or 5th grade, what percentage are clearly and accurately diagnosed with a learning disability when that is the impediment to doing well? How many go undiagnosed and just struggle?
A good
How many?
question.
My gross estimate, after having worked in this field for many years, would be that we're diagnosing less than 50% of kids with disabilities.
Why?
Lots of reasons.
Because of budget issues. Because this is a fairly new. I'm from Israel, so everything below 100 years is new. It's a fairly new area. When I started working in special education, learning disabilities were called minimal brain damage, MBD. That was the category for them. We know these days that they're not a brain damage. They're a difference in the brain, but they're not a damage. So I think in part that's the reason why they're not diagnosed. In part, the training and education that people who work in those fields have had, to my very personal opinion and professional opinion, is very lacking.
You're talking about teachers?
Yeah.
Are not trained to pick this up?
Teachers, special education people in general.
Special education people aren't trained? I thought they're the ones you go to for help if you're a kid.
Yeah. So did we all.
Oh my goodness.
I went through very thorough training in the area of special education. I did studies specifically in that area for a doctorate degree. We had one class on learning disabilities.
Okay.
there are at least 5 learning disabilities, each of which I think will need a 2-year training.
So certainly the people who are teaching aren't trained to catch this. But you're saying even the people who are trained to diagnose and treat. Wow.
The people who are supposed to catch it actually are not the special educator. They're the regular ed teacher who's supposed to catch, this kid is in my class, I've tried this, I've tried that, and they're not progressing, or I have a first grader who still doesn't know his letters and recognizes only 2 of the letters, seems to have difficulties expressing themselves. That's almost the ideal description of someone with possible dyslexia at first grade, and the teacher does not know how to tell what is what.
Can I offer an aside on that? So
sure.
in practically speaking, so we do a lot of second opinion work, and it's really kind of heartbreaking how many parents come in and say, my child is in late elementary school, middle school, high school even, and I have thought since they were in kindergarten something is not right. And they've gone to the teachers, they've gone to pediatricians, and time and time again are told, just wait, time will take care of it, or like Nira was saying, they're not motivated, or we've given them some basic testing and everything looks fine. And lo and behold, Nira will usually do that testing and comes out that they have a reading level of maybe 1st or 2nd grade, and it becomes clear. So it's great that they find out, oh, now I know what's going on with me. And the child it's great for their self-esteem, and we'll get into that, in the future. But the sad news is it's gone undetected. So I really agree with Nira that it just goes undetected, or it's explained as something else or attributed as something else.
What you just are telling us is very, very important.
It is.
You're saying to parents who suspect, don't just rely on the public school.
Right. Exactly, and trust your instinct, and it's and with kids, timing is everything. So the longer with each year in school, the demands go up exponentially, and they get further and further behind, and then you get into all of the emotional and the psychological and self-esteem sorts of impacts that just complicate it. Wow. So the early detection is just so important. That's why we're thrilled when we see parents bringing in their kids at ages 5 and 6, so that they can actually get some the needed accommodations or whatever the supports they need in place, rather than they're in 6th grade, they're in 8th grade, and even in high school, right? We've seen people come in.
We've seen adults
come in
who've never been identified.
Wow.
And as another thing, when Nira said it's a new field, how many parents have we had that actually break down into tears and say, that's me, but when I was a kid, it wasn't recognized, and so they went their entire school careers struggling, thinking they were unintelligent or that they were just oppositional, that sort of thing.
By the way, as an aside, are all of these childhood onset things, or sometimes you didn't have a learning disability as a child, but you do as an adult?
All of the disabilities we mentioned earlier are called developmental disabilities, which means that they do exist from birth.
Okay.
Many of those, as I said before, many of those types of learning disorders can occur also, can be acquired as a result of head injury, as a result of a couple other things, certain diseases, trauma in life and things like that. But no, we're talking mostly what we're relating to is developmental learning.
And in your 33 and your 17 years in private practice working with learning disabilities, what is the average age a kid comes to you and you catch the learning disability that was not caught?
It used to be, and it still is to a large extent, especially with the reading and written language disorders, 3rd, 4th grade, because the jump between 2nd to 3rd or 3rd to 4th grade in terms of the requirements that kids have in school for reading and writing, pretty much schools or teachers expect that by the end of 2nd grade, beginning 3rd grade, a student should be able to read information to read books for information, for leisurely reading, and be able to understand them. So there's less emphasis on teaching the basic reading skills. We actually, in our school system in the United States, except for a few places, We pretty much stopped teaching the basic reading skills by 5th grade. So if you can't read by 5th grade, you're not going to be able to read.
Fortunately, you're saying kids get to you before 5th grade, usually.
It depends. Much of the time, what has happened in special education, it used to be the decision whether or not a kid will get specialized instruction as a kid with learning disabilities used to be determined by a formula that was called the regression formula, which meant that the kid has to be so much behind grade level, so much behind age level, so many standard deviations.
That seems kind of dumb. It's like wait until you're in real trouble and then we give you some help.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a nice article that I brought about it. It's
Well, we
called
can't
Catch Them
read the
Before-
whole thing today. I'm
no,
sorry.
but it's called Catch
And I
Them
can't
Before
skim
They
it.
Fail. And
Catch them before they fail.
our model so far has been waiting to fail, and when the kids start failing, we catch them and we start doing something. But the problem is that then you have a 4th grader who is not able not only to do what is required in reading, writing, or language arts class, but he also can't read anything for the science class and for the social studies class and the math story problem. So it becomes a much more serious disorder than it should have been.
Okay. Give instructions, if you two will, to all the parents listening who have a kid who's 4 or 5 years old. What to watch for, what to do to not have the kid fall through the cracks the way you're describing this tragedy happening.
First of all, I always tell parents to trust their judgment. The worst that can happen if you refer your child to a specialist in school or specialist, private practice specialist, at a very early age is that they will test them and find out that you are wrong and there's nothing wrong with the kid.
Can you tell at 5 years old if someone has a learning disability?
Yes, we recently have 2 5.5-year-olds.
Okay.
And the comment of one of them after we finished testing, when his mom asked him what he thought about it, he said, well, what I learned is that I'm smart.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And
That's
that
nice.
to me is the most important thing that we can do for people.
But
The other thing he said is, I also learned that I have to teach my teachers how to teach me.
the 5-year-old said
Yeah,
this?
this 5-year-old
Oh, my
is
goodness.
a very, very extremely intelligent kid.
Wow.
But he's in kindergarten and he doesn't know any of his letters. He doesn't really understand the concept. We call it phonemic awareness. He
Yes.
doesn't understand the concept of the sound symbol combination.
Well, let me get to Dennis on something here. Again, we're talking to parents with young children. How do you know? What are the signs that you ought to get your kid to someone to diagnose? What do you look for?
Just think anytime that your child doesn't seem to be kind of progressing, or they're not able to manage some of the basic sort of skills, whether that's reading or behaviorally or emotionally, or they start concluding that there's something wrong with me, I'm not intelligent.
But would you know that before 3rd grade? I mean, could you
Yes.
get a kid?
There are symptoms. The internet right now, numerous books and literature and research, has a list of symptoms of different types of learning disabilities before that you can see before kids go into school. Problems with language development. Many kids who have expressive language disorders, which eventually can lead to dyslexia and dysgraphia.
Can you
would
put
have a
that in
hard
layman?
time.
I'm sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you, Nira, but
Sorry.
for time's sake, can you put this into layman's terms, what to look for in simple layman's terms with your child, so you know when it's time to, either of you, when it's time to take some action?
Look at how your kid's language develops as compared to other kids their age. As compared to your own other kids, if you have
Right.
other kids. This is hard for first-time parents, especially. We always hear that, we were first-time parents, so we didn't know. But you look at other kids the same age. Of course, different kids have different disabilities. Talk to your pediatrician, because they have some idea about when certain developmental steps should happen. Usually kids start talking or stringing words together around about 2.5 years old. If you have a 3-year-old who still is not putting words together, that's something that I would check into.
Can you check at 3 and see if there's a learning disability?
You can check to see if there's the symptoms that cause the development, that cause learning disorder, or relate to learning disabilities. Yes, there are activities such as tying shoes, being able to coordinate your hands and eyes, drawing within the line, those kinds of things. A history of dyslexia in the family. I would watch for the kids. Having said that, we have a history of dyslexia in my family. We have 4 children and only one has dyslexia.
By the way, we didn't define dyslexia.
Oh, and dyslexia is a neurologically based learning disorder in the area of reading. It's a reading disorder.
In what way?
It affects mostly the ability to develop basic reading skills, and it's anchored, or how you can see it in young children is, we're not born with the native ability to read and write. We're born with the natural ability to speak and understand language. In order to develop the ability to read and write, little kids start playing with the combination between a sound and a symbol. Like they know that the S sign sounds like S stop sign because it's on a stop sign. M in the United States is for McDonald's, so they know it's a M. Yeah. That's called phonological awareness, the awareness and understanding and the ability to remember the sound symbol combinations. Doing things like rhyming, playing word games and things which kids typically normally do between the ages of 2 to 4 maybe.
And what's the difference then with dyslexia?
That's called phonological processing. Dyslexia means that kids did not go through those stages and didn't develop the understanding that words have sounds and those sounds put together make words.
Just don't get it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you have a kid who has a difficulty with rhyming, say the word cowboy without cow, having some basic understanding of sound symbol combinations, I would seriously check into it even when the kid is 3 or 4.
In our last couple of minutes, I wonder if we can go to Dennis here on the emotional problems, the personal problems, if you don't diagnose these things. Let's say the kid doesn't know until they're in 7th grade about the problem. What happens socially and emotionally?
Well, the child often concludes they're dumb, or they're told they're dumb, or they're stupid. And, you think about one of the common things in early, classrooms are for kids to take turns reading aloud. And what happens if you have a disorder of reading where you can't read, or your reading seems so far behind your peers, or your writing looks. Often I've had many kids, they're very ashamed of their writing, and the other kids will see that and say, "You're dumb," or "You're stupid," and the child will conclude that. An interesting sort of sidelight to that is, since I've been working with Nira, and she's one of her areas of specialty are what's called the twice exceptional child. So not only are kids of average intelligence, but we see kids that are exceptionally intelligent, but they have one or more specific and severe learning disorders. So their ability to their awareness of their environment is extraordinary, and so they're able to very quickly at a young age gather something is not quite right, but the interpretation they'll make, because often others will tell them that, is, "I'm not intelligent." So one of the biggest things I see that Nira had referenced earlier is when they get the testing, and she has a wonderful way of explaining to kids, here's where you learn and here's what's going on, their self-esteem is so improved because they realize, I'm not dumb, I'm actually very smart.
I'm hearing one big, I'm sorry to interrupt, we're running out of time, but I'm hearing one theme that comes loud and clear through all of this. If you suspect, get your kid in for testing.
Early.
The
Yes.
earlier, the better.
And you've agreed to return the next podcast and talk to us about treatment and learning disabilities, so we're looking forward to that. And
Great.
Thank you two very much for
Thank
joining
you
us
so
and
much.
And we hope you'll listen to that next edition of Insights.